The Grapes of Wrath opens up with Tom Joad, a man just released from state penitentiary. Tom comes from a farming family in Sallisaw, Oklahoma. He returns to his abode after 3 years, only to find out that his family had been kicked out of their home and their house basically destroyed. They were in the process of scrounging together enough money to move out to California to find jobs picking peaches. They sold almost all of their possessions with the clothes on their backs and packed into their 1926 Hudson passenger car, all 12 of them. They then embarked on their long, arduous trip. The author describes the course of the trip in great detail, specifically embellishing upon the way in which the thousands and thousands of people on the road would come together in community each and every night. They left Oklahoma with 12 members in the group and arrived in California with 2 less, losing 2 more and Rose of Sharon's unborn baby while in California before the book even comes to an end. These losses may have been outweighed by a happy ending involving them arriving in California and finally settling down to a peaceful life. Sadly, this is not the case. Upon arriving in California, they found themselves in Hooverville, an area offering brief respite before they were forced to leave to find work. The Hooverville was burned to the ground by Californian citizens resentful of the migrating Okies, merely hours after the Joes left. They made their way to a government camp in Southern California, where they were afforded water for bathing and cooking, and a friendly community. However, they also had to leave this behind in order to find work to support themselves. You see, they had been lied to. The pamphlets that they had seen advertising their jobs available in positions such as peach picking had been filled up weeks ago, and all those that had migrated were left without a job. Desperately searching, they eventually came upon work at a place called Hooper Ranches Incorporated. They were picking peaches at 5 cents per box, barely making $2 a day. All was going seemingly well, and they were just barely getting by with enough food each day when Tom got involved in a strike and killed a man. Forced to leave to keep Tom safe, they came across a farm that needed cotton pickers, something they had experienced in. It seemed as if they had hit the lottery, and, with the whole family picking, they made enough money to sustain themselves and have sufficient meals every night. The reader is left feeling relieved that they had finally found stability when tragedy strikes. Coinciding with the huge rainstorm flooding the lands, the source of income, and their homes, Rose of Sharon goes into labor and births her stillborn child. Forced onto drier land, they find themselves in a barn with a man dying of starvation inside. Rose of Sharon, suffering from the grief of her dead child, breastfeeds the stranger to keep him alive, and the book comes to an end.
The even chapters within the book describes the Joads and their journey, but odd chapters shift the point of view of the narrator. For example, in Chapter 7, the narrator speaks as a used car salesman, describing how he methodically scams unsuspecting and naive farmers who don't know that much about the process of buying a car. Most of the odd chapters' subject matter intertwined with what is going on in the Joad's life within the story. Around Chapter 7 is when the Joads buy their car and start their journey on Route 66. In addition, the grammar also changes often when the narrator shifts perspective. He employs a lot of repetition, listing, and shortens his sentences to fully show that he is taking the voice of the characters he means to show. In addition, it's written in a third-person narration style that flips between an all-knowing point of view and an impersonal point of view.
The theming in this book is strong. It's probably the strongest and most integral part of the entire book. And the strongest of the themes is fear. First and foremost, fear of the unknown. This is common throughout the entire first half of the book. The Joads, going to California, they knew it wasn't a sure shot, but it was the only shot that they had. Even on the road to California, they were told that people were being taken advantage of and there was actually no work in California, which staunchly contrasted what they had heard in Oklahoma. But they still continued on. They still took a shot at what seemed at a better life. Another fear was fear of the depression itself and its characteristics. No work means no money. No money means no food and no shelter. No food means starvation. No shelter means no protection from the elements. Both then lead to death, and thus fear sets in. Another fear was the fear of getting taken advantage of. This is exemplified in Chapter 27, which describes a family who owns a cotton farm and is actually taking advantage of people who are in search of work by selling the bags that they say that they can make their money back on by picking cotton, when in reality they know that there is not enough cotton in the field to make enough money back on the bags. At the end of the book, in Chapter 29, this fear metamorphoses into anger, and when the fears of the people come true and work is not available for months on end, the people revolt. This is a good segue into the next theme of the book, which is that shared trauma unites people. Throughout the book, the trauma of the Great Depression and getting taken advantage of and getting kicked out of houses and not having work, it makes the communities that are experiencing it bond. Hardship, then, becomes synonymous with bonding throughout the book. Revolts are another sign of unity. For example, the workers' union that Tom Joad joins in the middle of the book. The best example of this is at the very end of the book, when Rose Sharon breastfeeds the old man, who is dying in her hands, not because she needs to, but because she feels that he is a sort of family to her, even though he is not related to her at all, and he is just really a random person. In other words, because people experience the depression together, it makes them bond closer, almost as if they are one giant family. Many become one. Finally, another theme of the book is faith and keeping faith. Throughout the book, many of the characters experience time where their faith is challenged. A great example of this is Casey, who in the early part of the book talks about his obsession with sleeping with girls, even though he is a priest. He says that he feels guilty sleeping with them after he gives them the Holy Spirit, which results in him leaving the Christian faith and going and experiencing his own faith. In staunch contrast, Ma Joad had faith every time something terrible happened to the Joad family. Even after Rose of Sharon's baby was born as stillborn, she still had faith that everything would be okay, led her family up the mountain, and led to the farm where Rose of Sharon eventually saved the old man's life by breastfeeding him. The theming of this book, overall, is indicative of what the farmers and people who experienced the Great Depression felt and experienced throughout that time.
I would not recommend this book. Although it is an American classic and describes events pivotal in the formation of our country as it is today, it is not the type of book that I personally was able to read and become absorbed by. The book is written very well, but does not have a fast-paced, intriguing plot that draws the reader in. I know that many people love it for its unique style and comprehensive descriptions, but I was sadly unable to find interest.
Personally, I would not recommend this book. I like to read books with a sense of adventure and joy to them, and this book lacks both. The book was nicely written and tied everything together extremely well. However, it was too depressing. Some might say this is in line with the theme of the story, being the Great Depression and the depression faced in the Dust Bowl, but to me it was just not that enjoyable to read.
I would recommend this book. It's depressing, which goes along with the setting of the Great Depression, but that's how it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to uplift you or be a happy book or have a happy ending. It's supposed to bring you into the reality of what was the Great Depression and the reality of what went on during the time. It was extremely well written, and the prose was phenomenally structured, especially in the odd chapters, which stray slightly from the main story, which, might I say, was a nice touch. Some might say that the plot isn't the tightest or most cohesive in terms of structure, which I'll admit. More accurately, it's hard to track at times, but I would argue that the prose itself is enough to draw the reader in, and is worth the read.